Now let's take a moment to work with the Git Ignore file. We will create a list of files or folders that we want to exclude from the repository. We want them to be ignored by Git, but we will do it in Visual Studio Code. So what we want to do right now, you can see I'm in my Git folder in my file explorer where I have my repositories, and I'm in the same Git folder in my PowerShell. So what we want to do right now is to place code command with the name of the folder we want to open in a Visual Studio Code. In our case, it will be the book folder. So let's hit enter. And we have our Visual Studio Code open. Let's make it full screen. And I wanted to tell you that we won't discuss the whole Visual Studio Code interface right now, because there will be time for that. But for the moment, if you have Git installed, you should have these interface elements visible. This icon right here, which is the source control, where we can see Git branches in the icon. As well, we have this Git indicator right here, which tells us that we are on our master branch. Now what we want to do is to open our terminal, pressing Ctrl and tilde on our keyboard. Just like this. As you can see right here, we have bash for our terminal. So let's change it to PowerShell for this video. Let's go to View, Command Palette. We have this option Terminal, select Default Profile, and we can choose PowerShell from here. Let's now open our new terminal with the plus sign right here, and we got PowerShell open. We can close this bash terminal by clicking this trash can. And now we can see we have only one terminal open, and it's PowerShell. It's exactly the same PowerShell as in our Windows. We can put git status, and we can see we are on a branch master. We have nothing to commit, so it works exactly the same. So now let's create a new file in our book folder, which is going to be .git ignore file. This file is recognized by Git as any other file. As I said, I won't be discussing the interface of Git in Visual Studio Code right now, because there will be time for this in this course. But even now you can see that this file is marked on green, and you can see the U letter next to it, which means that this is a new file which is untracked at the moment. The same information we will get when we place git status once again. Let's make this terminal a little bit bigger. And we can see the info that we have new untracked files, and we have one file, which is the newly created Git Ignore file. If we want, now we can add it to the staging area and do a commit with no problem. However, in this file, we indicate what should be ignored by Git. First important note, in Git Ignore file, we can indicate all the files that we have in our project. And these files will be ignored by the repository on one condition. These files must be untracked. For example, if we want now our chapter 1 txt to be ignored by Git, we have to delete it from the staging area first. We have to make it untracked again. And we can do it with no problem. But first I want to focus on the fact that the most common way of adding a file to Git Ignore is when creating a new file to be ignored. As we know, a newly created file is always untracked, so there's no problem with it. So let's create a new file. Let's call it chapter 5 txt. We can see this file is also untracked, which you can also see when you clear our console and put git status once again. It's the same information. We have two new files. Those files are untracked right now. And the same thing we can see in our interface, where we have these two files highlighted in green with the untracked U letter next to these files. So now let's go to our Git Ignore file. And let's place our chapter 5 txt into it. Let's save the changes with Ctrl S on our keyboard. And you can already see the effect in our interface. Now chapter 5 txt is no longer being tracked. It's no longer highlighted in green with the U letter next to it. Moreover, you can see it's faded right now. It has a darker color of font. We can also check it in our Git status once again. And you can see that we have only one untracked file, which is Git Ignore file. We can even put our Git Ignore file into our Git Ignore file so that it would be ignored as well. Let's do this. Let's save our changes. And you can already see the difference in our interface. And let's check it in our PowerShell as well. As you can see, we have nothing to commit because we have nothing in our staging area, because those two files are being ignored by Git. We usually don't want our Git Ignore file to be ignored by Git, so let's undo these changes. Let's delete it from here. Let's leave only the chapter 5 txt. Let's save the changes. And we can see that our Git Ignore is being untracked once again. Sometimes we put some comments into this file, and we can do it with the hash at the beginning of the line, where we can write, for example, chapter 5 working file. And that might be the reason we want this file to be ignored by Git. Because we don't want this file in our repository, we only want it in our working directory. Let's save these changes. Now let's see what happens when we want to add a tracked file to our Git Ignore, as I told you before. For example, our chapter 1. Chapter 1 txt. Let's save our changes. We can see that nothing changed at the moment. Now let's try to put some changes into this file. Let's save those changes. And we can see this file is not ignored by Git. Moreover, we can see the indicator right here. We have this file highlighted in some orangish color. And we have this capital M letter next to it, which stands for modified. So as I said before, this is not the way to put the files into Git Ignore, because we have to make this file untracked before we put it to Git Ignore file. We can't ignore a file that is already tracked by Git. I will show you in this course how to untrack a tracked file and then ignore it, but not now. Now I want to do something else. Let's go to our terminal and let's try to make a commit. As we know, adding this command git commit with the A flag will skip the staging area and add all new and modified files to our commit. So let's hit enter. As you could see, we didn't place a commit message in our command line. So here we have a window where we should place this message. Let's see what we have in this commit window. We have the information that we are on a branch master. We want to commit these changes. That's one modified file, which is chapter 1. And we have one untracked file, which is Git Ignore. So let's write our message at the top of this file. Let it be whatever. Let's save it and close this window. And now we can see the information that our commit has been done. Let's check it by typing git log. And we can see this is our newest commit with the commit message typed like this. As you can see, our commit message would be wrong, or we could not add all the files we wanted to. So we can add it and fix the commit we want. And I'm about to show you how to do it. Let's go to our PowerShell. If the list of the log is too big, we can scroll it, pressing arrows up and arrows down. If we want to leave it, we have to press the Q on our keyboard. So let's do it. And now we can use our PowerShell once again. Let's clear our console. All we want to do right now is to place git commit with the flag and with the double dash in front of it. Let's hit enter. And at this point, we are making a copy of a previous commit. It is in a way removed from our tree, and the new commit is put in its place, where we can, for example, write a new message. So let's do it. Add a text to the chapter 1 txt. Let's save it. Let's close it. We can see the info that our commit has been done. Let's place git log with the one line flag this time. Let's hit enter. And here you can see our newest commit is with this message, add a text to the chapter 1 txt, and we don't have the one with the random message in it. Now let's create a new folder. Let's call it src, which stands for the sources. Let's clear our console. Let's hit git status once again. And as you can see, the only info we got is that we have Git Ignore file, which is untracked. As you can see, we don't see any info about newly created folder because Git doesn't track folders if they are empty. So let's add a file to our folder. Let's call it 1txt, for example. Now let's go to our PowerShell, clear our console, put git status once again, and now you can clearly see we added src folder to our working area, which is untracked by the moment. That's because we have a file in it and it's not an empty folder anymore. Now let's go back to our Git Ignore file. Let's delete this chapter 1 txt because we know that it doesn't work anyway. Let's place a new comment. Let's call it sources folder, and let's our newly created folder to the Git Ignore file. And to add a folder to Git Ignore file, we have to use a slash and then the name of the folder, which is src in our case. src, so it might be some pictures which can have a big size, so we don't want them to be added to the repository, for example. Let's save this file. You can already see the change in our interface. Now this folder with the 1txt file in it is faded. Let's check it in our terminal. And you can see that we only have our Git Ignore file, and now our src folder is ignored by Git. So now let's add our Git Ignore file to the staging area with a dot, which means that we will add all the files in our working directory to the staging area. Now let's do the commit. With the message add the Git Ignore file, let's hit enter. And you can already see the effect in our interface in Visual Studio Code because we have no color indicators in our interface anymore. That means we have nothing to commit and everything is updated. We can also check it in the Git status. Where you can get the same information, which means everything is all right. We have one thing left before we move on to the theory, and that is showing you what we can find in the objects folder in our repository. And we can find it right here. Book, Git folder, objects. We have these mysterious folders in it and some interesting files in them. which names should remind you something at this point. But we will talk about it in the next video. So let's go on.